Today we're going to talk about Gaza, specifically activist claims that Israel is testing weapons on civilians. Also, we'll take a look at a cow who is terrorizing a grocery store inside of Israel. We'll see what that's all about. I'm Ben, and this is the Israel Guys. Welcome back to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of Jew hatred and anti-Israel propaganda, you should have a direct connection to the land and people of Israel. Guys, if you want to follow us on more platforms other than YouTube, we are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Take a look at our pages there and connect with us. We would love to have conversations with you on those platforms. Today, we are going to take a look at a video that comes from one of my favorite places to find videos to talk about on the show, and that is Twitter.
Israel uses the Palestinian people in Gaza as a testing ground for their weapons. They will fly their drones over the skies of Gaza. They will surveil their every move. And at any moment, these drones can turn and drop missiles on their heads. And every time they do, they will go out and say that their weapons have been battle tested.
So in this video, we see a woman who is an activist who is making some pretty extraordinary claims. She's basically outraged by the fact that Israel has drones that patrol over Gaza, that surveil citizens of Gaza, and that have the potential to shoot missiles or drop bombs on Gazan residences. And with people like this, there's kind of a couple different ways we could approach, looking at what they say, because the claims she's making are pretty fantastic. And she is either operating out of a basis of extreme ignorance. That would kind of be the nice way to look at this. Or there's something a little bit more sinister at play, and she's operating out of direct slander. The nice way to, the nice approach would say that, would be to say that she is operating out of ignorance, which, more than likely she probably is. But if that's true, if she is operating out of ignorance, there is absolutely not a single excuse for that, because facts about Gaza and the history of Gaza are very, very clearly laid out on numerous sources on the web. You can find this almost anywhere, and it's not really disputed by anyone. Like, not at all. I mean, when I was researching for this show, I went to pull up different sources to make sure I got my facts right, and I pulled information directly from an article on Al Jazeera. And as many of you are aware, Al Jazeera is not a pro-Israel friendly platform. I mean, very often they're very twisted and biased, from a pro-Palestinian kind of perspective. But a lot of this information came directly from Al Jazeera, directly from all kinds of left-wing media outlets. I mean, this is not information that's hidden or has to be pulled from obscure sources. Excuse me. So the history of Gaza goes something like this. Gaza was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, as was most of the state of Israel, back then known as Palestine, and residents were Palestinians, whether you were Jewish or Arab. And it was slated to be given to Israel as part of the mandate from the UN. When the UN voted to give a mandate to Israel, there was a war directly afterwards with a number of Arab nations attacking Israel. And at the end of that war, ceasefire lines were drawn. And those ceasefire lines on the east side of Israel, the ceasefire lines were drawn around what we know as Judea and Samaria today, in the west, what they called the West Bank at the time, because it was the West Bank of Jordan. Jordanian and Israeli armies, there was a ceasefire line. They drew a line, became known as the Green Line, around Judea and Samaria, and Jordan held military occupation of Judea and Samaria. At the end of the war, on the west side, the Gaza Strip was a finger, kind of looks like a finger coming off of Egypt, and a ceasefire line was drawn there, and Egypt held military occupation of the Gaza Strip. Neither country annexed it first. Egypt never annexed Gaza. Jordan attempted to annex Judea and Samaria, what they called the West Bank. Wasn't ever really officially recognized by anyone, and it wasn't. Yeah, they kind of tried, but it wasn't even that big of an effort. Neither one were particularly settled at the time. Basically, a series of military camps in small Palestinian or Arab villages. In the 1967 war, when Israel fought a war of self-defense against a number of Arab nations again, when they were almost annihilated again, new ceasefire lines were drawn. And after that war, new ceasefire lines included Egypt, Egyptian forces being driven all the way down to Egypt, and Israel holding control of the Gaza Strip and holding control of the Sinai Peninsula. And on the east side of Israel, ceasefire lines were drawn with Israeli troops being in Judea and Samaria, or Jordan's West Bank that they quasi tried to annex. And so after that, Israel now, after the war fought in self-defense, now took what Egypt had occupied, and now Israel had taken it back. And Israel did not annex, but a number of Jewish settlers went and settled because it was largely unpopulated, some Arab communities, but there was a whole new thriving set of Jewish communities that popped up, crazy, tremendous, cool agriculture, and all kinds of things like that. In 1993 is when the Oslo Accords happened. Israel made a quasi-peace agreement with the Palestinians. And in that peace agreement, Israel gave them some form of bodily autonomy with the Palestinian Authority, or what was known as Fatah of the day. And so with that authority came some form of governance over Judea and Samaria and some form of governance over the Gaza Strip. Fast forward to 2005, the Israeli government decided to pull all Jewish settlers out of Gaza, and what turned into a really crazy back and forth between kind of a big civil dispute inside of Israel. A lot of Zionistic Jews were very adamant that this is a land promised to us by God. We've settled it. It was largely barren. This is our territory. We can't just go handing it over to create some sort of de facto Palestinian state. The Israeli government went through with it, demolished beautiful Jewish communities, pulled out 10,000 Jewish residents from Gaza, handed over to the Palestinians. The Palestinians held elections. They tried to create a form of a Palestinian state inside of Gaza. They held elections. Hamas won those elections, and Fatah refused to create a government with Hamas. Hamas kicked them out of Gaza, and Hamas has been the ruling power ever since. Okay, so what does that have to do with the claim that's being made by this woman here on this Twitter video? It has to do with because Hamas took control of Gaza. And from her perspective, basically the way it seems like she sees Gaza is that Gaza is a normal state of being like any other country with a government, and people work jobs and they go to the grocery store and they drop their kids off at daycare. And Israel's a big bad aggressor, flying drones over top and surveying Palestinian citizens. But that is not the case at all. Like I said, this is information you could find anywhere. After Hamas took control of the government in 2006, when they took control, they took absolute and brutal control. The reign inside of Gaza by Hamas is an absolute reign of terror. They've turned it into a terrorist state. Now, a lot of the citizens of Gaza probably are not on board with this terrorist state, and there's a lot of secrecy surrounding how Hamas runs Gaza, but there's enough information has leaked out to know that it is an absolute brutal reign of terror. They hold the state of Gaza for the specific reason of destroying the state of Israel. That's why Hamas is there, and they use their citizens as human shields. They take a majority of the concrete and building supplies and other humanitarian aid that's shipped into Gaza and turn it directly into terrorist munitions. They lob tens of thousands of rockets over the border into Israel. They built tens of terrorist tunnels to tunnel directly into Jewish communities to stab and kill and murder Jewish civilians. It's a terrible, awful situation. And any Palestinians that dissent, that rebel against the Hamas, or a number of other things, are brutally tortured and murdered and imprisoned and separated from their families and all kinds of awful, awful, awful things. So that's the situation, and because of that, Israel is in basically a state of prolonged war and has been for the last 15 years between Israel and Gaza, which is now basically the terrorist state of Hamas. And so when you have a terrorist state directly on your border, directly almost overshadowing major cities within your state, you have to have somewhat of a surveillance state. And to be perfectly honest, Israel flying drones over the Gaza Strip to surveil Hamas and to keep Hamas from butchering their own citizens is the least of the concern of Palestinian residents. Trust me. Really, if you look into this at all, it really is the absolute least of their concerns. And so Israel, is she right? Is Israel testing weapons on Gaza? Is Israel testing weapons on Hamas? Absolutely. But Israel could test those weapons anywhere they wanted. It's not about testing weapons. It's about survival. It's absolutely about survival. And it's very difficult for me to imagine that this woman in this video doesn't understand that, but ignorance and extreme ignorance does exist. And so if anyone knows this woman, go do your research. Please go out, do your research, do some basic reading. It's very much unacceptable that you would stand up and publicly protest Israel's right to self-defense and right to bodily autonomy while not protesting against Hamas, who openly throws people off of skyscrapers for basic infringements of law. People, I don't even understand the logic that people would protest against Israel and their right to self-defense and will not protest against Hamas, who is absolutely brutal terrorist state. All right, guys, on a little bit of a lighter note, we had a video that came across the Root Sheva this week of a cow running rampant through a grocery store. This was down in Ashdod, in southern Israel, close to Gaza, actually. We just have a cow running through the grocery store. Not much commentary on that, but I just thought that would be worth throwing in as a lighter note. Something I thought was funny come across on the news this week. I'm going to throw out one more video before we take off here of Palestinians on the Temple Mount having a good time. They see they're dumping water on each other. They're having a water balloon fight. It's all these grown guys throwing water balloons and chasing each other around, which is fine. You know, people are allowed to have a good time. That's totally fine. Except this is the Temple Mount. I think sometimes it's really easy to forget what we're talking about when we talk about the Temple Mount. This is the place where God chose to put his name and his heart forever. God said, this is the place of my footstool, the place of my throne is the Temple Mount. This place was the site of the Jewish temple and the holiest place to Jews for hundreds and hundreds of years before Islam was even a thing, before Islam was even created by Muhammad. And Jews today are not allowed on the Temple Mount except with very specific restrictions. They can only come on the Temple Mount for several hours out of the day. They're only allowed to go up on certain days. They have to wait in a line, undergo strict security, can't pray, can't bow, can't show any articles of worship, can't even stay up on the Temple Mount. If they go up, they're run in a little tight circle around the Temple Mount and just driven off through another gate. While they're up there, a lot of times things are thrown at them, they're yelled at, they're cursed at, they're spit at, rocks thrown, all kinds of things. And Christians who respect the site, I'm a Christian, and I respect this Temple Mount as being holy. And my respect to the site, when I go up there, I get treated the exact same way. I get treated the exact same way as the Jewish worshipers that are up there. And so how come that's a thing? That's a thing for non-Muslims, but Muslims can go up and they can have a water balloon fight. They can throw water and they can party, and we go up, and almost every single time we go up, there are little kids having soccer games on the Temple Mount. They're kicking a soccer ball, soccer match is super great. Basically treated like a park inside of Jerusalem. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful place to do it, except this is supposed to be an extreme holy site for Muslims. If this is such a holy site for you, so holy that Jews and Christians aren't even allowed to move their lips, then why, when you pray, are your backsides turned to the Dome of the Rock and to the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Why are you having water balloon fights on the Temple Mount? Why do you play soccer on the Temple Mount? If you respect the site so much, this is a legitimate question, then why do you treat it the way that you do? Guys, subscribe and get the conversation going down below. As always, tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening here in the land of Israel. We'll be back every day, Monday through Friday, with your direct connection to the land and people of Israel.